impression. And this project now, I just want to tell you a little bit about, is a good example. This is one of our most ambitious shows of the entire 12-week period. It's Mittwoch aus Licht, or Wednesday from Light, by Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. It's was the only unperformed opera in his 7 days of the week opera cycle. Ruth had the idea that we were going to try and attempt this mad thing, and persuaded the Stockhausen estate that we should have the rights to do this, and that was a very difficult and long negotiation. She then went out and raised a large amount of money. It was probably the most expensive project that we put on. Having done that, persuaded the director Graham Vick and the Birmingham Opera Company that they would love to stage this unperformed opera, and they then had to go out and raise a large more money and take a substantial box office risk. So it was a testament to Ruth's ability as a negotiator and a persuader that we put this on. And I've got one or two images from this here. And of course it turns out it was a good reason why it hadn't been staged before. It was probably the most complicated and challenging opera projects that's ever been. There were over 6 hours of music in 6 parts. It featured 2 choirs, solo instrumentalists, a live electronic and acoustic setup, the like of which I'd never seen, and I've been around technical production for a long time, but seeing the live electronic mix done live with the choirs and the instrumentalists was extraordinary. We even had a dancing camel. This particular one isn't a real one, but there was actually a real one mingling with the audiences in the intervals. And Stockhausen was a particularly strange man. His stage directions included how the camel should smell. So these camels were, the live ones were dosed up with particular perfume during the intervals, and they mingled with the audience, which everybody enjoyed. And of course, the top 10 hit from Mittwoch is the Helicopter Quartet, which has actually been performed before. It's the one little part of the opera cycle that has been of Licht that has been performed. Now this of course involves a string quartet, the 4 individual members of which go up in 4 separate helicopters above the venue, and the music from their instruments is then beamed down into in our case the wonderful deserted Argyll Works, an old chemical plant, and the sound is mixed in from the instruments with the sound of the rotor blades from the helicopter, and this extraordinary soundscape is produced. And that's just one section of this 6-hour opera. So you can imagine the fun that we had and Birmingham Opera had producing this event. It was one of the most talked about events of the festival, and Stockhausen fans flew in from all over the world to see this, and we put on 4 performances in Birmingham. So what did the partners get out of being involved with the festival? Well, I suppose the key thing was association with the Olympic and Paralympic Games. It was a huge incentive. After some initial scepticism, I think everybody wanted to be part of the greatest show on earth as it's built, and we found in the end, to our surprise, that people came along with us and were prepared with some pretty stringent legal requirements that the IOC, the Olympic organisation, had. They joined us because of the support from a core organisation that delivered a national marketing campaign at a level which I think most arts organisations can only dream of. We produced a brochure, 500,000 copies of this brochure, biggest festival brochure I've ever been involved with. It's very exciting, putting together 13,000 performances from 250 partners who've all got a say and how it looks in the brochure. But the printed side of it was of course a tiny part. It was the big social media element of the marketing that was so powerful, the whole Olympic thing. So people were very keen to be involved with that, and there was a £4 million marketing budget for the Cultural Olympiad, as I say, something that those of us who've worked in the arts could only really dream of. And then the final reason they got involved, of course, was the amount of money that was able to be raised to put into projects themselves. The total budget for the Cultural Olympiad, sorry, for the London 2012 Festival, not the whole 4-year Olympiad, but just for the 12-week festival, was £63 million. And that's the biggest festival budget that we've ever seen in the UK for that sort of thing. So it was an enormous undertaking. And this is where the money came from. A quick word about our sponsors and supporters. The majority of the money came from the UK's National Lottery, then the Arts Council and central government, regional agencies, local authorities, 2 major commercial sponsors, and LOCOG itself invested substantially from its core funds. So it's a very large and complex funding package, and John Mortlock, the finance director of the Cultural Olympiad, did an extraordinary job pulling together these disparate funds over a 2-year period. And so did Ruth Mackenzie, of course, as a fundraiser as well as an artistic director. So that's some of the financial and operational side. Let's talk about some of the themes of the festival. And at the heart of the festival were the commissions to artists to create new work on a large scale, on a scale and ambition that could match in cultural terms, some of the sort of once-in-a-lifetime challenges that the Games presented themselves. So all in all, we presented 160 world and UK premieres of new work. And here is one of my favourites. This is Elizabeth Streb and her New York-based company, who Ruth commissioned to create this amazing spectacle of daredevil feats using 6 iconic locations and spaces across London in a project called One Extraordinary Day, which took place from 7 in the morning through till 10 o'clock at night one Sunday in London. And these images went around the world, and I think that's an important point to get across to you. It wasn't always just about the size of the audience that we had, but it was about the worldwide television audience that saw some of these fantastic cultural images. This one you might recognise is are the spokes of the London Eye, and 32 of her artists crawled out from the centre, climbed up inside the pillars that support the London Eye. I'm sure you've seen the thing, and then climbed out on these zip wires, what looked like zip wires, the things, and did a 45-minute spectacular at night to end the show. And here's another example. This is 3 of the artists walking down the front of our City Hall with the iconic Tower Bridge and the Olympic rings behind us. This image particularly was used across the world. And in fact, the central character there is Elizabeth Streb herself, 65 years old, walking down the centre of City Hall. So that's something I hope to be able to do when I reach that age. And here are 32 of her dancers leaping off Nelson's column at Trafalgar Square with Big Ben in the background. It really was a fantastic event, and these images went round the world, as I say. So another theme, an important theme that was part of the London 2012 Festival was art in unusual places. This was a major theme that Ruth wanted to explore. So from places like Stonehenge to Hadrian's Wall, the Giant's Causeway to the Shetland Islands, the shores of Lake Windermere, some of our natural best hits, if you like, of the UK. The festival programme came out of the art gallery, came out of the concert hall and the theatre to these unusual locations, these outstanding natural beauty spots, and promoted the UK's tourist sites in ways that had never really been seen before. And here's one, Stonehenge, which is a prehistoric monument, probably the most famous one for us in the UK, looked after by an organisation called English Heritage, who fiercely protect the historic monument. And they, after a lot of negotiation, allowed us to take an audience right inside the stones, which is very rare, it doesn't happen often. And we commissioned the French company Compagnie Carabosse to produce the fire garden. I'm sure many of you have seen the fire gardens. They're not a new show, but what was interesting was bringing it right inside this ancient monument and allowing this beautiful fire garden to happen inside the stones. Okay, so we jump to, let's just jump back a sec. Here's another one. This is at Hadrian's Wall, an 84-mile Roman wall that spans the UK. Used to be the border between Scotland and England. We commissioned Zach Lieberman of the American collective Yes Yes No to come up with this idea of spanning this 84 miles with helium balloons that were lit from the inside and creating a pulsing effect that ran down the 84 miles of the walls. And this was an interactive show where the audience could tweet messages that were then turned into electronic pulses that were sent down the walls through this lighting effect, and it really was a dramatic impact. Here's another one, a very famous landscape for Ireland, the north of Ireland here. This is the Giant's Causeway, where Hans-Peter Kuhn, the German artist, was commissioned to install an installation called Flags. This was very controversial with the National Trust, who again are the custodians of that site. They weren't at all keen to get arty types putting up installations on their beautiful windswept coast, but after a lot of negotiation, Hans-Peter was allowed to do this very simple but very beautiful installation called Flags, and these were all polystyrene boards that moved in the wind. It's a very windy part of the Northern Irish coast, so this was a very dramatic effect. And then my last little slide on this one is the director Constanta McCrass, who worked with the National Theatre of Wales to produce this show in a forest, deep in the forest in North Wales. So by these installations we were able to show to visitors, but also on a television audience, some of the fantastic natural assets that the UK had in a different way by using art for installations.